The year was 2347, and humanity had finally earned its place among the stars. After centuries of looking up at the night sky with wonder, Earth joined the Galactic Council, an alliance of advanced civilizations from across dozens of star systems. It was a moment of pride for everyone on the planet, but it came with challenges. The Council's elder races, species that had been traveling the galaxy for thousands of years, didn't see humans as equals. To them, Earth was just another primitive world trying to catch up. Daniel Carter knew this all too well. He was a young diplomat stationed on Arendor, the Council's capital planet. Arendor was a breathtaking place, filled with towering crystalline buildings that shimmered under 3 suns. The air smelled faintly of ozone, and the streets were alive with beings of every shape and size. For Daniel, being there was both exciting and humbling. His job was to represent humanity, to show the Council that Earth deserved respect. But it wasn't easy. Every day, he faced condescending stares and dismissive remarks. Still, he kept going, determined to make a difference. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Daniel returned to his office to finish some paperwork. The room was small but functional, with a desk cluttered with data pads and holographic displays. As he sorted through the files, something caught his eye. A series of encrypted logs tucked away in a folder marked Classified. Curious, he opened them. What he found turned his blood cold. The logs detailed experiments conducted on a human child named Lily Harper. According to the documents, Lily had been abducted from her home when she was only 6 years old. She was taken to a research facility on a distant planet where scientists performed brutal tests on her. They wanted to study how humans responded to extreme pain and psychological stress. The entries described procedures so horrifying that Daniel had to stop reading several times just to steady himself. There were mentions of physical injuries, sleep deprivation, and even attempts to break her willpower entirely. What made it worse was that these experiments weren't rogue actions. They were sanctioned by the Council itself, justified as part of a program to understand lesser species. Daniel couldn't believe what he was seeing. How could anyone do this to a child? And why hadn't anyone stopped it? His hands trembled as he scrolled through the files. There were photos too, grainy images of Lily strapped to a table, her face pale and terrified. Her eyes looked empty, like someone had stolen her soul. Daniel felt sick. He closed the files and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. This wasn't just wrong, it was evil. Someone had to do something about it, but who would listen? The Council held all the power. If Daniel reported what he'd found, they'd likely silence him before he could say a word. Even if he managed to get the information out, who would believe him? Most people on Earth still saw the Council as benevolent protectors, not monsters. Going public could destroy his career. Or worse, he needed help. Someone he could trust completely. That's when he thought of Rachel Meyer. Rachel was a former soldier who now worked as an investigator for an interstellar watchdog group. She specialized in uncovering corruption within organizations like the Council. More importantly, she had a reputation for being fearless and resourceful. If anyone could figure out what to do next, it was her. The next morning, Daniel arranged a meeting with Rachel at a quiet cafe near the embassy district. The cafe was small and dimly lit, with low tables and soft music playing in the background. Rachel arrived dressed in plain clothes, a dark jacket and pants, but her sharp eyes missed nothing. She slid into the seat across from Daniel and gave him a curious look. "You said this was urgent," she said, cutting straight to the point. "What's going on?" Daniel hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Then he pulled out a data chip and slid it across the table. "I need you to look at this," he said quietly. "But not here. Somewhere secure." Rachel raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. Instead, she pocketed the chip and nodded. "Let's go." They left the cafe and headed to Rachel's apartment, which doubled as her workspace. It was a modest place, sparsely furnished but equipped with state-of-the-art tech. Rachel plugged the chip into her computer and began reviewing the files. As she read, her expression grew darker and darker. By the time she finished, her jaw was clenched tight. "This is unbelievable," she muttered, shaking her head. "How did you find this?" "It doesn't matter," Daniel replied. "What matters is what we do about it." Rachel leaned back in her chair, thinking, "If we expose this, the council will come down hard on us. They'll deny everything and probably try to eliminate anyone involved. Are you ready for that?" "I don't have a choice," Daniel said firmly. "We can't let them get away with this. Not to Lily, not to anyone." Rachel studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right, here's what we're going to do." Over the next few days, Daniel and Rachel worked tirelessly to gather more evidence. They hacked into restricted databases, bribed low-level officials, and pieced together a timeline of events. The deeper they dug, the more disturbing the picture became. It wasn't just Lily. There were hints that other children might have been taken too, though the records were incomplete. Whoever was behind this had gone to great lengths to cover their tracks. Finally, they had enough. With Rachel's help, Daniel compiled everything into a single dossier: photos, logs, testimonies, and analysis. It was damning proof of the council's crimes. Now they just needed to decide how to use it. Their first thought was to take the evidence to Samantha Brooks, a senator known for her passionate advocacy of human rights. Samantha had a reputation for speaking truth to power, and she might be willing to champion their cause. So one evening, Daniel and Rachel met with her in a private conference room at the United Earth Senate building. Samantha listened intently as Daniel explained what they'd discovered. At first she seemed horrified, nodding along and asking thoughtful questions. But as the conversation went on, her demeanor changed. She started glancing at her watch, fidgeting with her pen. When Daniel finished, she sighed heavily. "This is troubling," she admitted. "But you understand the risks, don't you? If we accuse the council of something like this without irrefutable proof, it could start a war." "We have proof," Rachel insisted, sliding the dossier across the table. "Everything you need is right here." Samantha flipped through the pages, her expression unreadable. Finally, she closed the folder and looked up. "I'll review this carefully," she promised. "But I can't make any guarantees." Daniel and Rachel left the meeting feeling uneasy. Something about Samantha's reaction didn't sit right. Over the next few days, they waited anxiously for news, hoping she'd take action. Instead, they got a message summoning them to another meeting. This time, Samantha wasn't alone. Two security officers stood behind her, their faces grim. "I'm sorry," Samantha said, avoiding their eyes. "But I had no choice. The council demanded I hand over your files." Betrayal hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. "You gave them to them?" he asked, his voice trembling with anger. "They threatened sanctions against Earth," Samantha replied defensively. "We can't afford to lose their support." "So you sold us out?" Rachel snapped. "Just like that?" Before Samantha could answer, the security officers stepped forward. "You're both under arrest," one of them said. "Come quietly." Daniel and Rachel exchanged a glance. There was no way they were going quietly. In a flash, Rachel grabbed a vase from the table and smashed it against the wall, creating a distraction. While the officers were momentarily stunned, she and Daniel bolted out the door, disappearing into the crowded corridors of the Senate building. As they ran, Daniel realized they were on their own now. No one in power would help them. If they wanted justice for Lily and for all the others who had suffered, they'd have to fight for it themselves. And that fight was just beginning. Daniel and Rachel didn't stop running until they reached the outskirts of the city. The streets were quieter here, lined with warehouses and abandoned buildings. They ducked into an alleyway, their breaths coming in short gasps. Daniel leaned against a crumbling wall, trying to catch his breath while Rachel scanned the area for any signs of pursuit. "We can't stay here," Rachel said finally, her voice low but firm. "They'll be looking for us." "I know," Daniel replied, still struggling to process what had just happened. Samantha Brooks, the one person they thought they could trust, had betrayed them. She hadn't even hesitated before handing over their evidence to the council. It was clear now that Earth's leaders weren't going to stand up for humanity. Not if it meant risking their alliance with the Council. Rachel pulled out her communicator and tapped a few buttons. "I have a contact who might help us," she said. "Someone I worked with during my time in the military. If we can reach him, he might know where we can hide." Daniel nodded, though he wasn't sure how much longer they could keep running. Every step felt heavier than the last, not just because of exhaustion, but because of the weight of what they'd uncovered. The Council had abused a child, an innocent human child, and no one seemed to care. How could they fight something so powerful? What chance did two people have against an entire galactic empire? But Rachel wasn't about to give up. She had seen worse odds before, and she knew that sometimes survival came down to sheer determination. "Come on," she said, grabbing Daniel's arm. "We need to move." They made their way through the maze of alleys, sticking to shadows and avoiding main roads. After nearly an hour of walking, they arrived at a small, unmarked door tucked between two dilapidated buildings. Rachel knocked 3 times in quick succession, then waited. A moment later, the door creaked open, revealing a tall man with dark hair and a scar across his cheek. "Rachel?" the man asked, his voice gruff, but not unfriendly. "What are you doing here?" "It's good to see you too, Ethan," Rachel said with a faint smile. "Can we come in?" Ethan glanced at Daniel, then stepped aside to let them enter. The room inside was dimly lit, filled with mismatched furniture and stacks of equipment. It looked like some kind of makeshift workshop, though Daniel couldn't tell exactly what it was used for. Ethan closed the door behind them and turned to face Rachel. "You're taking a big risk bringing someone here," he said, nodding toward Daniel. "Who is he?" "This is Daniel Carter," Rachel explained. "He's the reason we're in this mess, and maybe the reason we can fix it." Ethan raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. Instead, he gestured for them to sit. "All right, spill it. What's going on?" For the next hour, Daniel and Rachel told Ethan everything. The experiments on Lily Harper, the Council's involvement, and Samantha Brooks's betrayal. As they spoke, Ethan listened intently, his expression growing darker with each detail. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. "That's a lot to take in," he said finally. "If even half of this is true, it's bigger than anything I've dealt with before." "It's all true," Daniel insisted, "and we have proof. But we can't go to anyone else. We've already been burned once." Ethan nodded slowly. "You're right about that. The Council has eyes everywhere, and most of Earth's leaders are too scared to stand up to them. But there are others who might be willing to listen. People who've been waiting for a chance to strike back." "What do you mean?" Rachel asked. Ethan stood and walked over to a locked cabinet in the corner of the room. He opened it and pulled out a map of the galaxy, spreading it across the table. "There's a group called the Iron Vanguard," he explained. "They're rebels, mostly ex-soldiers, scientists, and civilians who've had enough of the Council's tyranny. They operate underground, hitting targets that weaken the Council's grip on power. If anyone can help you expose this, it's them." Daniel frowned. "Rebels? You want us to join a rebellion?" "It's not as crazy as it sounds," Ethan replied. "The Council rules through fear and control. Without those tools, they're weaker than they look. The Iron Vanguard knows how to hit where it hurts. And if your evidence is as solid as you say, it could rally other species to our side." Rachel looked at Daniel, searching his face for a reaction. "It's risky," she admitted. "But Ethan's right. We don't have many options left." Daniel sighed, knowing she was right. They couldn't fight the Council alone, and appealing to Earth's leaders had already failed. If they wanted justice for Lily, they needed allies, people who understood the stakes and were willing to fight dirty if necessary. "Okay," he said finally. "How do we find them?" Eaton smiled grimly. "Leave that to me." Over the next few days, Ethan arranged for Daniel and Rachel to meet with the leader of the Iron Vanguard. Their journey took them deep into the wilderness, far from prying eyes. They traveled by night, using old vehicles and hidden paths to avoid detection. Finally, they arrived at a remote compound nestled in the mountains. It was heavily fortified, with guards posted at every entrance and surveillance drones patrolling the perimeter. Inside, They were brought to a large meeting room where a man named Marcus Kane awaited them. Marcus was in his late 40s, with sharp features and piercing blue eyes. He wore plain clothes, but his presence commanded respect. As Daniel and Rachel entered, he stood and extended a hand. "Welcome," he said simply. "Ethan tells me you have something important to share." Daniel hesitated for a moment, then handed over the dossier containing all the evidence they'd gathered. Marcus flipped through the pages, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he set the folder down and looked at them. "This is damning," he said quietly. "If we play this right, it could turn the tide against the council." "But how?" Rachel asked. "Even if we expose them, they'll deny everything. They always do." Marcus nodded. "True, but actions speak louder than words. If we combine your evidence with strategic attacks on their infrastructure, we can force them to respond. And when they do, the rest of the galaxy will see them for what they really are." Daniel felt a flicker of hope. For the first time since discovering the truth about Lily, he felt like they might actually have a chance. But there was still one thing he needed to know. "What happens after that?" he asked. "Say we win, what then?" Marcus smiled faintly. "Then we rebuild. Not just Earth, but the entire galaxy. A new order, based on fairness and cooperation. But first, we have to tear down the old one." The planning began immediately. Marcus assigned teams to analyze the evidence and identify key targets within the Council's network. Factories producing weapons, communication hubs controlling interstellar traffic, and research facilities conducting unethical experiments, all were marked for sabotage or destruction. Meanwhile, Rachel and Daniel worked with a team of engineers to refine the message they would send to the galaxy. They wanted everyone to know what the Council had done, especially the other oppressed species who might join their cause. As the days passed, Daniel found himself growing closer to the rebels. Many of them had lost loved ones to the Council's cruelty, and hearing their stories only strengthened his resolve. He also spent time with Rachel, who seemed more driven than ever. Together, they pored over maps and plans, strategizing every move. One evening, as they sat around a campfire outside the compound, Daniel looked up at the stars. "Do you think we can really pull this off?" he asked Rachel. She followed his gaze, her expression thoughtful. "I don't know," she admitted. "But we have to try. For Lily, for everyone." Daniel nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever happened next, they wouldn't face it alone. The rebellion was growing stronger every day, fueled by anger and hope. And soon the Council would learn that humanity wasn't as weak or as forgiving as they thought. The Iron Vanguard moved quickly. With Daniel and Rachel's evidence in hand, they began executing their plan to dismantle the Council's grip on the galaxy. Marcus Kane, the leader of the rebellion, was a master strategist. He divided the group into smaller teams, each tasked with hitting specific targets that would cripple the Council's operations. Factories producing weapons, communication hubs controlling interstellar traffic, and research facilities conducting unethical experiments were all marked for sabotage or destruction. Daniel had never been part of anything like this before. As a diplomat, his job had always been about words, negotiating, persuading, finding common ground. But now he found himself in the middle of a war, surrounded by people who knew how to fight back in ways he couldn't have imagined. At first, he felt out of place, unsure if he could contribute. But Rachel reminded him that his role was just as important as anyone else's. "You're the one who uncovered the truth," she told him one night as they reviewed plans in the compound's command center. "Without you, none of this would be happening. That makes you just as much a fighter as anyone here." Her words gave him strength. Over time, Daniel grew more confident, learning to navigate the chaos of rebellion. He worked closely with the engineers, helping them refine the message they would broadcast to the galaxy. They wanted everyone, from the Council's member species to oppressed populations on distant planets, to know exactly what the Council had done. The goal wasn't just to destroy their infrastructure, but to expose their crimes and turn the galaxy against them. The first major operation targeted a massive factory on the planet Zorath 7. This facility produced advanced weaponry used by the Council to maintain control over its territories. Without these weapons, the Council's ability to enforce its will would weaken significantly. A team led by Ethan Cole infiltrated the factory under cover of darkness, planting explosives throughout the complex. Daniel stayed behind at the compound, monitoring communications and coordinating with other teams to ensure everything went smoothly. As the explosives detonated, the factory erupted in flames visible from orbit. News of the attack spread rapidly across the galaxy, sparking outrage among those who already distrusted the Council. For years, the Council had presented itself as a benevolent force bringing order to the stars. Now cracks were beginning to show in that facade. But the Council didn't stay silent for long. Within hours, HFY War, the ancient being who led the Council, addressed the galaxy in a broadcast. His voice was calm but carried an edge of menace. "An act of terrorism has been committed against the Galactic Council," he declared. "We will not tolerate such aggression. Those responsible will be hunted down and brought to justice." His words sent shivers through many worlds, but the rebels weren't afraid. If anything, the Council's response only fueled their determination. Marcus gathered the Vanguard's leaders to discuss their next move. "They're scared," Marcus said, pacing the room. "That's why they're lashing out. We need to keep the pressure on." Their next target was a communication hub, located on a moon orbiting the gas giant Tylos 4. This hub controlled a vast network of signals connecting the Council's member species. Disabling it would disrupt their ability to coordinate attacks and maintain control over their territories. Rachel volunteered to lead the mission, knowing how critical it was to sever the Council's lines of communication. The team arrived at the moon in a stolen transport ship disguised as a cargo vessel. They landed near the hub and split into two groups. One group created a diversion by setting off small explosions near the perimeter, drawing guards away from the main building. Meanwhile, Rachel and her team slipped inside, disabling security, systems and planting charges at key points. As they worked, Rachel couldn't help but think about Lily Harper. She wondered what the young girl had endured at the hands of the Council, and whether she was still alive somewhere. The thought made her hands shake slightly as she set the final charge. Shaking off the emotion, she signaled her team to retreat. The explosion rocked the moon, sending debris flying into space. The communication hub was destroyed, leaving the Council temporarily blind and deaf. Across the galaxy, oppressed populations took notice. Uprisings broke out on several planets with rebels inspired by the Iron Vanguard's actions. Species that had once feared the Council now saw hope in defiance. Word of the rebellion reached even the most remote corners of the galaxy. On a mining colony deep in uncharted space, workers laid down their tools and refused to send resources to Council-controlled planets. On a desert world ravaged by drought, farmers stopped paying tribute to Council envoys. Each act of resistance added fuel to the fire spreading through the stars. Back at the compound, Daniel and Rachel worked tirelessly to amplify the message. Using hacked transmissions and intercepted broadcasts, they shared Lily's story with anyone who would listen. Images of the young girl, pale and terrified, appeared on screens across the galaxy. Her name became a rallying cry, a symbol of the Council's cruelty and humanity's resilience. "We are not alone," Daniel said during one broadcast, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "The Council has abused us, exploited us and treated us as less than equals. But we will not bow to their tyranny any longer. Together we can build a new future, one where no child suffers as Lily did." The response was overwhelming. Messages of support poured in from every corner of the galaxy. Some offered resources, others promised troops, and many simply thanked the Iron Vanguard for giving them hope. For the first time, Daniel felt like they might actually win. But victory wouldn't come easily. The Council launched counterattacks, targeting rebel strongholds and attempting to capture key members of the Iron Vanguard. Several teams were ambushed, and some didn't make it back. Losses weighed heavily on everyone, especially Daniel and Rachel. They attended makeshift memorials for fallen comrades, lighting candles and vowing to honor their sacrifices. One evening, after a particularly brutal skirmish, Rachel sat alone in the compound's courtyard, staring up at the stars. Daniel joined her, sitting quietly beside her until she spoke. "Do you ever wonder if we're doing the right thing?" she asked softly. "All this death, is it worth it?" Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "Yes," he said firmly. "Because if we don't stop them, they'll keep hurting people like Lily. They'll keep treating us like we don't matter. I'd rather die fighting than live knowing I did nothing." Rachel smiled faintly, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You're stronger than you think, Daniel." "So are you," he replied. As the rebellion gained momentum, the council grew desperate. Vor ordered increased patrols and tighter restrictions on travel between planets. But the more he tried to clamp down, the more rebellions flared up. The galaxy was slipping out of his control, and he knew it. In a last-ditch effort to regain dominance, the Council announced a summit on Arendor, inviting representatives from every member species to discuss the growing unrest. It was clear they intended to paint the Iron Vanguard as dangerous extremists, hoping to isolate them and crush their movement. But Daniel and Rachel saw an opportunity. "If we can get someone inside that summit," Daniel suggested during a meeting with Marcus and the other leaders, "we could expose the Council directly, show everyone the truth in real time." "It's risky," Rachel admitted, "but if we pull it off, it could end this once and for all." Marcus agreed, assigning a team to infiltrate the summit. Daniel volunteered to go, knowing it might be his only chance to confront Vor face to face. Rachel insisted on accompanying him, unwilling to let him face the danger alone. The day of the summit arrived, and the team disguised themselves as delegates from a minor species eager to prove loyalty to the Council. They entered the Grand Assembly Hall on Arendor, where hundreds of beings from across the galaxy had gathered. Vor stood at the center of the stage, his towering form radiating authority. As the speeches began, Daniel and Rachel prepared to execute their plan. Hidden devices in their clothing would transmit everything happening inside the hall to the Iron Vanguard's network, ensuring the galaxy saw the Council's hypocrisy firsthand. When Vor took the podium, Daniel stepped forward, his heart pounding. "You claim to bring peace and prosperity," he said loudly, his voice echoing through the hall. "But your empire is built on suffering. You've abused children, enslaved populations, and silenced dissent. The galaxy deserves better." Gasps rippled through the crowd as holographic images of Lily and other victims appeared above the stage. Vor's expression twisted with rage, but before he could respond, alarms blared throughout the hall. The Iron Vanguard had breached the planet's defenses, launching a full-scale assault on Arendor itself. The final battle had begun. The Grand Assembly Hall erupted into chaos as alarms blared and red lights flashed across the walls. Council members scrambled to their feet, shouting orders and trying to restore order. Vor stood frozen for a moment, his towering form casting a long shadow over the panicked crowd. Then, with a roar of fury, he pointed at Daniel. "Seize them!" he commanded, his voice booming like thunder. Guards rushed toward Daniel and Rachel, weapons drawn. But before they could reach them, the floor trembled violently. Explosions rocked the building, sending shards of crystal and debris raining down. The Iron Vanguard had launched its final assault on Arendor, targeting key structures tied to the Council's power. Outside, ships streaked across the sky, firing precision strikes that disabled defense systems without causing widespread civilian casualties. Rachel grabbed Daniel's arm and pulled him toward an exit. "We need to get out of here," she shouted, over the noise. They ran through the crumbling corridors, dodging falling debris and panicked Council officials. Behind them, guards gave chase, but the rebels had planned for this. Hidden allies stationed throughout the building ambushed the pursuers, buying Daniel and Rachel precious time. As they reached the outer courtyard, Marcus Kane was waiting with a hovercraft. "Get in," he yelled, revving the engine. They climbed, aboard just as another explosion shook the ground, sending a plume of smoke rising into the air. "We've done it," Marcus said, grinning despite the chaos around them. The Council's defenses are down. Meanwhile, high above the planet, the battle raged on. Maria Lopez, one of the Vanguard's top engineers, had developed a prototype weapon capable of disabling advanced technology. From the bridge of their flagship, she oversaw its deployment. The weapon emitted a pulse that spread outward, neutralizing every piece of Council-controlled machinery in its path, from starships to surveillance drones. On the ground, the effects were immediate. Streets went dark as power grids failed. Military vehicles sputtered to a halt. Even Kael'vor's personal guard found themselves unarmed, their sleek energy rifles reduced to useless hunks of metal. For the first time in centuries, the Council's tools of domination were silenced. Inside the assembly hall, Kael'vor realized the extent of the disaster, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. "How dare you?" he snarled, turning to confront Daniel, who stood defiantly near the shattered remains of the stage. "This isn't about daring," Daniel replied, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "It's about justice. You took an innocent child and treated her like an experiment. You abused your power and thought no one would stop you. But you were wrong." Kael'vor lunged forward, but Rachel stepped between them, holding a small device in her hand. It was a failsafe, a backup trigger for the weapon Maria had deployed. She pressed a button, and the Council leader staggered back, clutching his chest. The nanites embedded in his body, the ones that kept him alive far beyond the lifespan of any normal being, had been deactivated. "You're not invincible," Rachel said coldly, "and neither is your empire." With Kael'vor incapacitated, the remaining Council members surrendered. Some tried to flee, but the rebellion's forces intercepted them before they could escape. Others attempted to negotiate, offering concessions and promises of reform. But the galaxy had heard enough lies. One by one, the Council's member species turned against their leaders, demanding accountability for decades of oppression. In the days that followed, the Iron Vanguard worked tirelessly to stabilize the situation. Without the Council's centralized control, many planets descended into temporary disorder. But the rebellion had prepared for this. Teams of mediators, engineers, and humanitarian workers fanned out across the galaxy, helping local populations rebuild and establish new governments. Lily Harper became a symbol of hope during this turbulent time. Through painstaking efforts, the rebels located her on a distant research station where she had been held captive. When they found her, she was frail and frightened, her eyes hollow from years of torment. But as news of the rebellion's success reached her, a spark of life returned to her gaze. Daniel visited her often, bringing her books, toys, and stories of the galaxy's newfound freedom. He told her about how her courage had inspired millions to rise up against tyranny. Though she rarely spoke, her presence reminded everyone why they had fought so hard. Samantha Brooks, the senator who had betrayed Daniel and Rachel, faced intense scrutiny back on Earth. Her actions came to light when the rebellion released classified recordings of her meeting with the Council. Public outrage forced her to resign, and she disappeared from public life altogether. In her place, new leaders emerged, people committed to ensuring humanity played a fair and equal role in galactic affairs. The Iron Vanguard disbanded after achieving its goals, its members returning to their homes or continuing their work in other ways. Daniel and Rachel stayed together, traveling the stars and sharing Lily's story wherever they went. They became advocates for interstellar cooperation, working to ensure the mistakes of the past weren't repeated. Ethan Cole took charge of rebuilding Earth's military, transforming it into a force dedicated to protecting rather than conquering. Marcus Kane retired quietly, content to let others take the spotlight while he watched the galaxy heal from afar. Maria Lopez continued her research, developing technologies aimed at improving lives rather than destroying them. Years later, the galaxy was still recovering, but the scars of the Council's reign began to fade. A new alliance formed, one based on mutual respect and shared responsibility. Humans, once dismissed as insignificant, now stood shoulder to shoulder with elder races, contributing ideas and innovations that shaped the future. Lily grew stronger with each passing year. Though she never fully recovered from her ordeal, she found solace in art, painting vibrant pictures of worlds she hoped to see someday. Daniel and Rachel promised to take her to those places when the time was right. One evening, as they stood together on the observation deck of a ship bound for a newly liberated planet, Daniel looked out at the stars. "Do you think we did enough?" he asked Rachel softly. She smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We did what we could," she replied, "and sometimes that's all anyone can ask for." The ship sailed onward, carrying 3 people and the hopes of countless others toward a brighter tomorrow. The galaxy had been broken, but it was also healing. And for the first time in a long time, the future felt full of possibilities. The galaxy had changed, but change was never easy. In the months following the fall of the Galactic Council, tensions simmered across star systems. Some planets embraced the rebellion's ideals, working together to create a fairer and more just society. Others struggled to adapt, their populations divided over how to move forward. Old wounds ran deep, and trust didn't come quickly after centuries of oppression. Daniel Carter and Rachel Meyer found themselves at the center of this fragile new world. They weren't politicians or military leaders, but they had become symbols of defiance, ordinary people who had stood up to extraordinary evil. Their names were whispered in gratitude on some worlds and cursed in anger on others. But no matter where they went, they carried Lily Harper with them, both literally and figuratively. Lily had begun to heal, though her journey was far from over. She rarely spoke, preferring instead to express herself through her art. Her paintings were vivid and haunting, filled with swirling colors that seemed to capture the chaos of the universe. One piece showed a dark, shadowy figure crumbling under a bright light, a representation, Daniel thought, of the council falling apart. Another depicted a young girl standing alone on a barren planet, reaching toward a distant sun. It reminded him of Lily herself, broken but hopeful, searching for warmth and belonging. Rachel encouraged Lily to share her work with others. "Your story can help people understand what happened," she told her gently one evening as they sat together, in their small quarters aboard the ship. "You don't have to talk if you don't want to. Just let your art speak for you." At first, Lily hesitated. She wasn't sure anyone would care about her paintings, or about her. But when they visited a refugee camp on a war-torn moon, she saw how much her presence meant. Children gathered around her, staring wide-eyed at her artwork. Adults listened intently as Daniel explained who she was and why her story mattered. For the first time, Lily felt like more than a victim. She felt like a survivor. While Lily began to find her place in the galaxy, Daniel and Rachel focused on rebuilding what the Council had destroyed. They traveled from planet to planet, meeting with leaders and citizens alike. Their mission was simple: to ensure that no one forgot the lessons of the past. They shared recordings of Kael'vor's crimes, testimonies from survivors, and images of the rebellion's fight for freedom. They also emphasized the importance of unity, urging species to work together rather than turn against each other. But not everyone welcomed their message. On a mining colony orbiting a dying star, they faced hostility from workers who blamed humans for the Council's abuses. "You're the ones who joined them," a man shouted during a town hall meeting. "Why should we trust you now?" Daniel stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "We made mistakes," he admitted. "We trusted the wrong people, and innocent lives were lost because of it. But staying silent won't fix anything. We're here because we want to make things right, together." His honesty disarmed some of the crowd, though others remained skeptical. Rachel took over, speaking passionately about the need for cooperation. "This isn't about blame," she said. "It's about building something better. If we keep pointing fingers, we'll never move forward." By the end of the meeting, a few people approached them privately, asking questions and sharing their own stories of suffering under the Council. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was progress. And progress, Daniel realized, came in small steps. Back on Earth, efforts to rebuild were underway. The planet had been scarred by decades of neglect, its resources drained to fuel the Council's empire. Cities lay in ruins, ecosystems were damaged, and millions lived in poverty. But the rebellion's success had ignited a spark of hope. Volunteers poured into devastated areas, planting trees, repairing infrastructure, and teaching sustainable farming techniques. Ethan Cole played a key role in these efforts. As head of Earth's reformed military, he redirected its focus from defense to humanitarian aid. Troops trained in combat now learned how to provide medical care, distribute supplies, and assist with reconstruction projects. Ethan himself spent long days visiting affected regions, listening to people's concerns and promising action. "It's not enough to tear down the old system," he told Daniel during one of their calls. "We have to build something stronger, in its place. Something that works for everyone." Daniel agreed, though he worried about how long it would take. Change was slow, especially when so many lives had been shattered. Still, he took comfort in knowing that humanity wasn't facing these challenges alone. Other species, inspired by the rebellion's example, offered assistance. Engineers from a desert world helped design water purification systems. Healers from a jungle planet shared medicines and treatments. Even former council members, seeking redemption, contributed knowledge and resources. Amidst all the rebuilding, there were moments of joy too. On a lush green planet known for its vibrant festivals, Daniel, Rachel, and Lily attended a celebration marking the anniversary of the rebellion's victory. The air buzzed with music and laughter as beings of every shape and size danced together under strings of glowing lights. Children ran through the streets clutching colorful flags and balloons. Vendors sold food and crafts, their stalls overflowing with goods. For Lily, it was overwhelming at first. She clung to Rachel's hand, unsure how to react to such a lively scene. But as the night wore on, she began to relax. She watched the dancers with fascination, her eyes lighting up whenever someone spun or leapt into the air. When a group of children invited her to join their game, she hesitated, but then nodded shyly. Daniel watched from a distance, his heart swelling with pride. "She's coming out of her shell," he said to Rachel, who smiled beside him. "She's finding her place," Rachel replied, "just like all of us." As fireworks exploded overhead, painting the sky with bursts of color, Daniel felt a rare moment of peace. The road ahead was still uncertain, full of challenges and unanswered questions. But for now, surrounded by friends and allies, he allowed himself to believe in the possibility of a brighter future. Not everyone shared his optimism. On the fringes of the galaxy, remnants of the Council's forces plotted revenge. They called themselves the Shadow Vanguard, a twisted echo of the rebellion that had brought them down. Led by a cunning strategist named Varric, they sought to exploit the chaos left in the Council's wake. Their goal was simple: restore the old order, no matter the cost. Varric knew better than to launch a direct attack. Instead, he worked quietly, sowing discord among newly formed alliances and stirring up old rivalries. His agents infiltrated governments, spreading lies and misinformation. They sabotaged relief efforts, framing the rebellion for failures and setbacks. Slowly but surely, they chipped away at the fragile trust holding the galaxy together. Daniel and Rachel heard rumors of Varric's activities but dismissed them at first. "We can't fight shadows," Rachel said wearily. "Our job is to keep moving forward." But when a supply convoy carrying medicine to a plague-stricken planet was ambushed and destroyed, they realized they couldn't ignore the threat any longer. Evidence pointed to the Shadow Vanguard, and survivors claimed to have seen Varric himself leading the attack. "We have to stop him," Daniel said firmly. "If we don't, everything we fought for could collapse." Rachel nodded, though her expression was grim. "Then we prepare for another fight." The battle against Varric wouldn't be easy. Unlike the Council, which had relied on brute force and arrogance, Varric was cunning and patient. He struck quickly and disappeared before anyone could retaliate. His followers were loyal and well-trained, willing to die for their cause. Confronting him would require strategy, sacrifice, and unwavering resolve. But Daniel and Rachel weren't the same people they'd been when they first uncovered the Council's crimes. They had grown stronger, wiser, and more determined. With Lily by their side and the support of countless allies across the galaxy, they knew they could face whatever came next. As they boarded their ship and set course for the Shadow Vanguard's stronghold, Daniel looked back at the stars. The galaxy was still healing, still finding its way, and while the scars of the past might never fully fade, they served as reminders of what had been endured and what had been overcome. "No matter what happens," he said to Rachel, "we'll keep fighting for a better future." "For Lily," Rachel added softly. "For everyone," Daniel finished, and with that, they sailed onward, ready to meet the next chapter of their journey.